Hello friends, how are you? I hope everyone is doing great. So today I'm going to talk about Docker Compose support in Spring Boot 3.1. Okay, so since like Spring Boot 3.1, the Spring Boot provides a new module called like Spring Boot Docker Compose, so that directly integrates with Docker Compose. Okay, so I'm going to discuss about that. Okay, so let's start that. Okay, let's open the Spring Boot initializer here. Okay, to start like one Spring Boot application. So let's open that. So I'm going to take this version 3.2.0 version, and after that I'm going to take the Maven build tool, and this is the Java language. And so I just taken Spring Boot Docker Compose. These are the dependencies are required. So I need like web dependency. I use the JPA here, okay, to work with the Postgres. So I need this data JPA and the Postgres SQL driver, and I need a Lombok dependency to work with setters and getters. And the last one is I need to integrate the Spring Boot with the Docker Compose. So I'm going to play with the Spring Boot Docker Compose module. Okay, so I need this Docker Compose support dependency here. Okay, so that's it. You can generate this project, and after that you can import into your IDE. And I already imported this project in my ID. Okay, so first of all I need a entity class, right? So let's create one entity class. So this could be auto generated. Okay, and let's define the ID here. So that's it. And so if you want, you can define generated value. Okay, so that's it. And let's create one more repository. So I need repository, right? Your product primary key type here. That's it. And the last one is we need to define the controller, right? So let's write one controller package. Inside this controller package I need to create product controller here, right? So to save the time, I already created this product controller because this is straightforward, it doesn't take much time. Okay, so I just have this product controller, so I just have a request mapping here, API products. This is my endpoint, and I have like two endpoints here. One is like to save the product, another one is to find all the products. And now, so to work with the Spring Boot application, right, so we need to define our uh, data source configuration properties inside this application dot properties, right? Okay. So suppose okay, so let's say, so you are going to deal with this data source properties. You have to define this data source URL and the username and the password, and we need to define this dialect here, right? So this is how you have to be defined, and after that this is for like to create your um, schema. Okay, you need to provide like either like create or update here, right? So but these properties are mandatory. So if you are dealing with like your any data source, so here I'm going to dealing with the Postgres database. That is the reason I just define the username and the password, and the dialect is Postgres SQL dialect here. Okay, and so basically if we're dealing with like Spring Boot with Docker Compose, right, so we need to create a Docker file here. Okay, so that is Docker Compose file. So the Docker Compose file basically either it could be, okay, Docker Compose.ml file, or like you can provide like compose, okay, dot YAML file, right? So this is how you have to define your Docker Compose, okay, uh, file. So I'm going to take a Docker Compose.yaml file. Okay, so basically the Spring Boot will look into this root directory with this Docker Compose.yaml file, or like compose.yaml file. Okay, so here, so I'm going to define the version. Okay, so I'm going to take 3.1 version here, and after that services, we need to define the services here. Okay, so my service is let's provide the DB. Okay, so I'm going to take um, DB. Okay, DB, right? So DB is basically I'm going to take image, so that could be Postgres, and after that I'm going to take the ports here. Okay, I need to deal with the ports, right? So let's provide like 5432. Okay, this is default port for this Postgres. Okay, and after that we need environment here. So the environment, basically we need Postgres username. Okay, and so I'm going to take uh, so Postgres here, and after that we need Postgres. Okay, password here. Okay, so let's take password here and Postgres DB. Okay, so I'm going to take Postgres underscore docker underscore DB, right? So that's it. So you define like here like all the Postgres related properties here, right? So no need to define this Postgres properties again in this application.properties file. Okay, so why? So what is the advantage in Spring Boot 3.1 is, okay, so the Spring Boot 3.1 will auto configure this, okay, JPA or data source properties, okay, in Spring Boot 3.1. So that is the main advantage. So you don't have to be defining your application that properties are like application that YAML file. So the Spring Boot 3.1 auto configure that details. Okay, so how it will auto configure? So let's jump into the Spring Boot documentation. So let's go over this Spring Boot 3.1 connection details. Okay, so Spring Boot 3.1, so the Docker Compose support in Spring Boot 3.1 is built on top of the connection details abstraction. So basically, so what it will does is this connection details is an interface. Okay, so extend, so this connection details will extend by multiple other interfaces which model the connection to a concrete remote service. For example, if you are dealing with Redis, right, so the Redis connection details for a connection to a Redis server. Otherwise, so if you are dealing with like JDBC, right, so SQL, MySQL are like PostgreSQL, right, so it will work with like JDBC connection details for the connection to a database server through the JDBC, right? So here, so they have added like connection details abstraction primarily to support our like to new Docker Compose and test container features. Okay, so this is how the JDBC connection details interface will look like, which will extend this connection details. So this JDBC connection details will have like username and the password and the JDBC URL. Okay, so this is all the Spring Boot need to know in order to connect the JDBC database, right? So the URL contains which is JDBC driver to use, which host and which port to use, right? So these details basically setting by the Spring Boot 3.1 by using this connection details and the JDBC connection details, okay, interfaces. So I'm going to provide this link in this description, so just go over this. Okay, let's go back to our okay application. So the prerequisites are we need to install and start the Docker in our local machine. Okay, so I already started the Docker in my machine. So, okay, so this is the Docker desktop, so you can see the Docker containers here. Okay, so let's start this application. Okay, so it started successfully now. So if you can check here, okay, so what it will does is basically using the Docker Compose file, so it is searching in our root directory. Okay, so because the Docker Compose.yaml file is already available in the Docker in this project root directory, and it is using the Docker Compose file, and it is creating, okay, the services. So it is creating and created, and after that DB is creating, and it is created and started waiting healthy. Okay, so finally it is checking the endpoint, so we got like healthy endpoint here, and it is started this application on 8080. Okay, so that's it, and let's go back to our Postman here. Okay, and now so let's create some product. Okay, So let's create by using this post endpoint. Okay, so it is created successfully. Let's get it by using the get endpoint. Okay, okay, we got it. So this is how it will work. Now let's go back to our project. And and one more thing is, we can play with like Docker Compose life cycle as well. Okay, so the life cycle means, so the application is started, right? So you can go back to your Docker desktop. Here you can see the Spring Boot and the DB containers are running, right? So you can check the status here, right? So when the moment the application will start, right? So the Docker Compose, okay, will start, and it will start the containers and running the containers, right? So when you stop this application, right, then it will shut down the, okay, your containers. You can see this status are exited here, but I don't want to stop this containers. Okay, so if you want to play with like a Docker Compose lifecycle, right, so you can play here. So how we are going to play, so let's talk about that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create, okay, one application.ml file. Okay, so this application.ml file, I'm going to take this Spring JPA. So I'm going to play with this Docker Compose lifecycle, right? So let's take lifecycle management. Okay, so we have like three values here. Either you can use, okay, none. Okay, that means like do not start or stop your Docker Compose. Okay, otherwise you can define like start hyphen only. So that means like start the Docker Compose when the application starts and leave it running. Okay, it doesn't stop. So what if like if you want to like start Docker Compose when the application start and stop it when the JVM exit, right? So start, okay, start and, sorry, start and stop. Okay, and now, so we need to define, okay, we have a start command. Okay, so this start command, so you can provide start here, and after that stop command. So instead of stop, what you can do is you can provide like, okay, down. That's it, right? So now let's test this future. Okay, the application has been started successfully. Now, so let's test this. Okay, it's working fine. Now let's go back to Docker desktop. So here you can see the Docker status as running, because the Docker Compose, when the application start, okay, so it will start it, right? So when the JVM is, okay, stops, then it has to be down the containers, right? So let's stop this server and let's go back to here. So you can check the containers here. So now there are no containers are running here. Okay, that means the containers are like stopped here. So this is how you can manage your Docker lifecycle management with the help of these commands, right? So this is another feature. So let's remove this, okay, and go back to, okay. So suppose like, so here we have a Docker Compose.ml file, right? So if you want to deal with like multiple environments, suppose I don't want to use this Docker Compose. Okay, so let's say I have like two environments. I have a dev environment. Okay, I'm just going to refactor as a Docker Compose.dev.ml file. Okay, so I'm going to take another file. Okay, test. So this is the test environment file. Now, so the thing is, if you start this, you will get an error, because so it will search with either with like Docker Compose .yaml file or like compose.yaml file. So now we have changed this file name as dev, right? So to fix this issue, okay, so we got like issue is Docker Compose file not found, right? No Docker Compose file is found in the directory. So to fix this issue, basically we have two ways, okay. So the first way is, okay, we have to be define Docker Compose file name here, okay. So what I'm going to do is Docker Compose, uh, so I'm going to take the dev ml file, okay. So you can define Docker Compose dev.ml file. So the specific environment file, if you want to define, you can just define here, okay. Now it will pick Docker Compose dev.yaml file, right? So it is started. And so like waiting for like containers to start. So Docker containers may take like time to install or start, right? So by default the Spring Boot waits for like all the services and containers to start. So here note that a container is considered ready when the TCP IP connection can be established to its mapped port, right? So if you want to turn off this behavior for a particular containers, like, so we can use like readiness check, like TCP disable property is there, so we can make use that property, okay. So let's go back to your Docker compose.dev file, okay. So here we need to define, okay, the label, okay. And labels, here we need to define that Spring framework, okay, boot readiness check TCP disable is equal to true, okay. So with the help of this, okay, if you want to turn off this behavior for a particular container, so we have to define like this, right? Okay, let's restart this application, okay. So test it finally, okay. We don't have any data, so let's create some data here, okay. And let's get, okay. So like this you can use like this properties here, okay. I hope like I covered like all the features, okay. If I miss anything, please let me know in the comment section. If you like this video, please go ahead and like. If you haven't subscribed my YouTube channel, please go ahead and subscribe my YouTube channel. Thanks for watching. Bye, have a good day.